Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me in another video. So as you can tell based on the title, we finally have a conclusion to the Chanel plot. Matthew Blasey is going to be going to Chanel. And we've already known this for the past couple of weeks. We talked about it previously on this channel, but it has been made official. So this from Vogue. Chanel has appointed Matthew Blasey as its artistic director of the house's fashion activities, responsible for all haute couture, ready-to-wear, and accessories collections. The house announced on Thursday, putting an end to the months' intense speculation. He will report to Bruno Pavlovsky, president of Chanel Fashion and Chanel SA, Alan Wertheimer, global executive chairman, and Lena Nair, global CEO of Chanel, called the designer in a joint statement one of the most gifted designers of his generation. His vision and talent will reinforce the energy of the brand and our position as a leader in luxury. Under Bruno Pavlovsky's leadership, we are confident that Matthew Blasey will continue to shape what's next and write a new page in Chanel's creation. I am convinced that he will be able to play with the codes and heritage of the house through an ongoing dialogue with the studio, our ateliers, and our maison d'art. Pavlovsky said his audacious personality, his innovative and powerful approach to creation, as well as his dedication to craftsmanship and beautiful materials, will take Chanel in exciting new directions. Following the sudden departure of Virginie Viard from Chanel, June 2024, the job has remained vacant, culminating an avalanche of rumors surrounding who would end up with what is arguably the most coveted job in fashion. In the past 6 months, designers from Hedi Slimane to Simone Porte-Jacquemus were considered frontrunners. Blasey, who joins from Bottega Veneta, has an impeccable track record, making him well suited to the role of Chanel, which involves designing 10 collections per year, 2 ready-to-wear, 2 couture, 2 pre-collections, 1 cruise, 1 métier d'art, plus Coco Beach and Coco Neige. The Paris-born 40-year-old designer graduated from Brussels Le Comble in 2007 and has held designer stints at Raf Simons and Maison Margiela, where he earned his couture stripes designing the brand's artisanal line and gained recognition for his work. In 2014, he became the senior designer at Celine under Phoebe Philo before reuniting with Raf Simons at Calvin Klein as VP of Design for women's wear and menswear from 2016 to 2019. In 2020, he became Daniel Lee's right-hand man at Bottega Veneta as design director. After Lee's sudden exit, he was appointed creative director in 2021 and presented his first collection for the Italian house in February 2022. Under Blasey, Bottega Veneta became one of Milan's hottest brands with a strong focus on craftsmanship. The brand has proved particularly resilient in the luxury downturn. Sales were up 4% in the first 9 months of 2024 to $1.23 billion, making it the top performing brand among Kering's fashion houses. The spring 2025 show was well received, with standouts including deliberately creased pieces, striped shirting, fluid all-leather paillette evening dress, and more. Earlier on Thursday, Bottega Veneta announced that Louise Trotter would succeed him as creative director of the Italian house. Chanel will be a much bigger test for the designer. The company revenues hit $19.7 billion in 2023, up 16% year-on-year, making it the world's second largest luxury brand behind Louis Vuitton. The fashion business includes bags, ready-to-wear, and footwear, generated roughly $14 billion according to estimates by HSBC managing director Erwan Rambourg. The company, now led by CEO Lena Nair, has doubled revenues in the last decade, and this appointment will play a key role in the next phase of growth, not to add pressure of earning the job. I am thrilled and honored to join the wonderful house of Chanel. I look forward to meeting all the teams and writing this new chapter together, Blasey said. He will join the house in 2025. So I'll link that article down below if you want to review it, but I think there are some key reasons as to why Chanel chose him. I do have some, questions about what his Chanel would look like, but in terms of why Chanel chose him, I think one main factor was his tenure at Bottega. We can look at this from multiple ways. I think when it came to him taking over that house, it was never really about him first. It was Bottega Veneta and him honoring that brand. In contrast to a lot of the names being considered, he just doesn't have like the kind of overpowering presence, to put it lightly, but he still has a strong design arm. And I think at Bottega, it was an evolution of what Daniel Lee did. He kept the brand on that upward trajectory while still keeping it chic and cool at the same time. His approach was always to honor the house, and Chanel wants someone who wants to preserve the house rather than completely radicalize and change it. And of course, Bottega as a brand continued on an upward trajectory, even during this period where luxury has been on a bit of a decline, like luxury fashion. There are a few brands that have, in this past year, even this past quarter, that have been doing well. Hermes, Miu Miu, Brunello Cucinelli, and Bottega Veneta are the few bright spots in luxury fashion where we're seeing growth. And again, these brands are quite also representative of the times we're in, but I'm sure it is appealing to Chanel knowing that when times are tough, he's able to weather the storm. And I think also he has the capability to do ready-to-wear handbags. He did the artisanal collections at Margiela. He also recently launched the fragrance line under Bottega. What he's going to be focusing on is the fashion side. But I think to understand Chanel as a brand, understand the world of Chanel, it's a huge house. It is fashion, but it's also beauty, it's fragrance. Of course, those are separate, but him launching that fragrance line under Bottega, I'm sure was a bonus. I'm very curious to try it. Another point I think as to why he was picked was because his handbags and his accessories have done extremely well, be it the Andiamo, the tote version, or the East-West version, the sardine bag. Also this year we saw, I think, the hot bag, it really rose to prominence. The re-edition of the Lauren bag, also just really cool conceptual plays on materials, like the paper bag. The bags look like they're made of denim, but they're actually leather. That's definitely a signature of his work. Bags that look like they are made of clothing that looks like it's made of knitwear or denim, but it's actually made of leather. And how we saw that in his fashion and the accessories. But I think it shows that he's also a commercially minded designer. While we've been talking about things like quiet luxury, he really did ride this quiet luxury, this kind of wave that we've seen really, really well. Of course, prior to him, we saw Daniel Lee, and I'm sure the brand would have done well, but I think he really pivoted the brand towards that direction. But we also saw moments of playfulness. The last fashion show, there were those fun animal chair pieces at the show, and he also did a collab with Richard Scarry, the children's book writer. I think the handbags, when you look at them, they were always still a nod to the legacy, the history, yet they always felt relevant. And another sub point, while I've never owned any Bottega bags from his era, I've heard a lot of people rave about how great the quality of the bags are. This is something that probably Chanel also needs to work on as a brand. But another main point as to why I think he was chosen was he's a team player. He's quite hands-on with his teams. Another important point is Layla Sophia. She made a really great video. I'll link her video down below, but when she was talking about this topic, when we first heard about the story, she talked about how inclusive Matthew Blazy's shows at Bottega have been, the kinds of influencers that would be invited, and how she really feels this brand has become a safe space for her. I just think Chanel also doesn't want to hire somebody that's a problematic designer. They want to hire someone that they can work with, that's a likable guy. He isn't really this loud personality, and he lets his work speak for himself. Now, in terms of, I guess, just like things that we have really yet to see from Matthew Blazy is, while I think he's had an extensive resume, I've really enjoyed his fashion from what I've seen. It's very conceptual. Again, he comes from that school of Ralph Simmons, Margiela. I think he's going to bring a whole new tone to Chanel, and I'm very curious to see what that tonal change is going to be. Maybe it's not going to be a huge change, but I don't know how similar it's going to be to what we've seen with Virginie taking on the torch, as well as the recent work from the design team. I think what we think of when we think of Chanel is Karl's interpretation of Chanel. It was very high key, very loud logos, CC, Chanel text, right? I would say he's more of a low key designer in a very modern and forward way, I would say, but it's not something I immediately think of when I think of Chanel. Frankly, I thought Chanel would go in the direction of a designer like a Marc Jacobs or a Galliano. I wouldn't have thought they would have picked someone that was to the right of Raf Simons, which is quite fascinating to think. But it will be interesting to see what his fashion will look like. Chanel, it's not just ready to wear, it's also couture. What's that gonna look like, right? Designers like Galliano and Sarah Burton were speculated because of their couture, but I think this will be something very different. What we will see at Chanel is just gonna be a totally different tone. I think the appeal about Mathieu Blazy is that he's a younger designer and he's been learning from the masters and he's acquired his own level of mastery himself. This is gonna be, I think, a new arena for him. Another thing I also wonder is while he was at Bottega, I think he was given a lot of grace when there was that transitional period from him and Daniel Lee. I don't think he was ever held to such a microscope. Bottega's a 10th of the size of Chanel's brand. I also think the Bottega customer was probably quite pleased with this transition from Daniel Lee to Mathieu Blazy. But Chanel is a brand that is under the most intense scrutiny, criticism, and rightfully so, considering the prices of Chanel, the reach of Chanel, how mass appealing it is. Does 10 collections a year, so that's a lot of work for him as well. But one thing I wonder is what will the Chanel customer who was buying into Virginie's vision and Carl pieces, how will they respond to his work? Only time will really tell, right? I think for me, I wouldn't say he was my first pick, but I do appreciate the world he comes from. Really appreciated his approach to Bottega. I think it's great that he was at Margiela. He was the right hand to Raf Simons and was a head designer with Phoebe Philo at Celine. I know a lot of people that like brands like Theroux and Old Celine and Hermes like his work as well. I am holding it back a little bit, but I am very curious to see what his Chanel will look like. But I do wonder, what will this recent Chanel customer, how will they respond to this? I would love to know your thoughts down below. While Chanel, I don't think for me has been a brand that has been really resonating with me as much as it did in the past. And it's not just like the direction of the brand. I also think it's just the change in my personal style as well. But I'm actually quite open to this move. I am personally open to this direction and where he takes the brand. But yes, I would love to hear, are you someone that has been into recent Chanel, and what are your thoughts on this move? Ultimately, at the end of the day, you really have to see his work, but that's why I'm really intrigued. I feel like I haven't been that interested in Chanel, and maybe it will be great or maybe it will be a complete flop. But to say that I am curious and I haven't been that curious about Chanel in a while, that needs to be said. So yes, anyways guys, that's today's video. We've already talked about this in the past before, but I do think that this is going to be a different era for Chanel, a new tone from what we are used to. I think it's going to be an evolution. I don't think it's going to be like a whole complete change, but I think it is something that has been long overdue at Chanel. It's been a while since I've been able to say this, but I'm actually quite looking forward to what we see at Chanel. I am curious to see what happens to the brand and would love to know your thoughts on this pick. Thank you so much for joining me in another video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!